My name is Grace Moorhead. I studied a Bachelor of Branded Fashion Design and I just graduated in April this year. So I chose to study at Billy Blue because it's a less traditional uni. I feel the class sizes were a lot smaller. I was then able to gain more one-on-one time with the lecturer, which I think was really important for me. And yeah, I didn't get lost in a sea of students essentially. Like, the lecturers knew who we all were and what we wanted to achieve in each class, which I think was really great. The course puts a really strong focus on the marketing and branding side of fashion, which I think is really important for emerging designers to understand and sort of delve into, because they're designing for a customer, and if they don't understand how that customer wants to be marketed to and how they receive their information and how they dress and all that kind of stuff, then they're not going to be able to design garments that they want, essentially. So I think the fact that the course, specifically branded fashion, offered that and exposed us to that kind of area of the industry was just really great and eye-opening for me. Like, I loved the fact that I could learn about the industry as a whole, really, rather than just sewing, designing, producing clothes. I understood that fashion was one of the largest contributors to climate change and all that kind of stuff, but I never really knew to what extent and how it was doing that. So I think throughout my whole 3 years of the course, they touched on sustainability in nearly every class almost, and it helped me sort of piece together, okay, so this is how, as designers, as buyers, marketers, whatever, in the fashion industry, we can do our part to reduce the carbon footprint that the fashion industry has. And I think because it is such a pressing issue for my generation especially, I think it was so important. And I'm so grateful that we got to learn about that sustainability side, because it's definitely something that even in the industry they're starting to sort of talk about, which makes us appealing to employers as graduates, because we know about and have designed in that mindset of being sustainable, and which aligns to their values as a company as well. So that final trimester, basically you take 3 subjects, where all those 3 subjects you're creating your final collection, final branding portfolios, final technical portfolios. And so all those 3 subjects sort of work together to produce that whole project. So you create a branding portfolio, which basically details the ins and outs of your hypothetical brand. So, marketing, target audience, branding, product branding, like all that kind of stuff goes into that portfolio, and it really details what that brand is about. You then are required to create a collection for that brand and then produce 3 looks from that collection and create them in real life. Alongside that, you also create a technical portfolio, which then details all the costings and technical aspects of each garment that you've produced. So I think it's really important for a graduate to go through that process, because not only are you designing a collection, you're thinking about how that collection is going to be marketed to your audience, how that is going to, what those garments are going to cost, and is that viable? All those like real world things that you're learning and applying in your collection, which I think is very important for students to learn. So in 2020, when COVID hit and sort of peak lockdown came about, there was a massive transition period for me and all the other students. So I guess we sort of had to really try and figure out how we were going to produce these final collections in an entirely online setting, which basically meant I had to readjust how I learnt. But the lecturers especially were like really great at sort of keeping us all in the loop, making sure they were on top of our situations, and if we needed any help, they were always there to kind of give that to us, which I think was really great knowing that we had that support even though we weren't seeing them every day, like face to face. So yeah, they were really great in that aspect. So being in the middle of COVID lockdown and being online, I sort of wanted to try and readjust my way of producing my collection to sort of speak to the time that we were living in. So, you know, big fashion brands were turning to digital and virtual outlets to market their collection. So I wanted to sort of mirror that in mine, which is why I chose to go in that digital direction. I think also from a sustainability point of view, it was really great because having the collection all designed and created using technology, no materials or resources were used or wasted in the process, which was a bonus for me. And I think it was just a really great opportunity for me to be able to explore an area of the industry that's only just sort of emerging, which I think was really exciting. So I guess my concept was also derived from the fact that we were in the middle of COVID. So I based my collection off the Little Mermaid fairy tale. So with my concept and my collection, I wanted to spark that nostalgia and sense of familiarity that people get from those fairy tales that we were told as children and viewed as children. So I think that's why I lent into that fairy tale kind of thing, because at that time everything was so unknown and a bit scary for some people. So that's why I chose to base the collection off that concept. So because digital ways of producing fashion was so new to me, it took a little while to sort of figure out how I was going to make it happen. But basically I reached out to a digital fashion specialist via Instagram, and she was actually based in Melbourne, so all of our meetings were over Zoom and email, which was very COVID appropriate, I guess. And she basically created samples and patterns and created those garments for me while I essentially gave all the creative direction, made sure that the texture, the colour, the silhouettes were all exactly what I wanted. And so while I wasn't really creating those garments myself, I saw them come to life in a digital sense, which was just really great for me to see because I'd never seen that before, and the technology they were using to create the garments was just really cool to be able to sort of learn about and see how that all worked. And although I feel like as a designer, you always get a sense of pride when you see your garments being worn by people and they're completed, and from a sketch to them being worn is just a really great feeling. And essentially I didn't get that big with the digital aspect of it, but seeing them come from just 2D like technical sketches to this like digital masterpiece, for example, like it was just really interesting to see that come to life, and all the things that the digital specialist was able to do with them was just crazy. So I really loved being able to see how that all happened.